So before getting into asking the questions to the panelists, I just want to give a bit of a context to the panel. If we were listening to the first two sessions during the day, the first half of the day, the two sessions, I think fair bit of examples came from water. So if you were to ask anyone saying, what do you mean by commons, right? How do you define commons? More than 50% chance that the example is going to come either from water or from forest, right? Now, each of these commons actually have evolved their own set of provisional goods that they provide, but own set of governance mechanism in different parts of the country. And so here we are coming together to discuss how water commons in particular, because India water policy says that water to be treated as commons. So today I have got with me a fantastic panel. Pratul, who represents Government of India's Atal Bhujal Yojana. So he has a lot of experience coming from there. And for those who are new, who don't know Atal Bhujal Yojana, this is one policy, this is one program which actually looks at demand management and looks at demand management while trying to bring communities' decision making into the center of the discourse. So that's very important, and we would love to understand that from Pratul. We have Sharman with us, who represents Hindustan Unilever Foundation in India, and they have been doing programs which support ideas like save more, meaning save more water, and use less, meaning again the demand management, how can you produce the same amount of whatever you're producing with less amount of water, right? So we'll have some lessons from there. We also have with us Vishwadeep Ghosh, who was earlier with the same organization that I represent, Arghyam, and who is now leading Water for People Trust in India. And Vishwadeep and WFP's work has been at multiple levels intersecting with not only water, but water and technology, water and skilling, and obviously water and governance. So we'd love to hear Vishwadeep's experience on that. And then, last but not the least, and in fact, I would say my own water journey has been influenced by reading some of the stuff that KJ has written. And so KJ is with us here representing the researcher slash activist space. So I hope by now it's clear to everyone saying we have a really powerful, good mix of panel here. So now, without much ado, I want to directly go into the common introductory question to all of you. I'll repeat the question if needed, but what I'm trying to figure out is, in each of your experience, what are the trends that you see in water as commons or otherwise water governance? What are the trends, what are the challenges, and what are the opportunities you see in your work related to water being treated as commons and its governance? Over to you, Pratul. Let's start with you.
So the first trend that we see, that I see, is a shift. Shift from the emphasis on source to the emphasis on resource in the context of groundwater. Shift from tube wells, bore wells, hand pumps, dug wells to aquifer. And a shift from government initiatives, government supported, a top-down approach to a community-centric approach. And both these trends are, being pioneered by Department of Water Resources, Government of India. The emphasis on aquifer is being done through that National Aquifer Management and Mapping Program, in which, we get to have an idea of the quantity and quality of groundwater, its distribution, its attributes in space and time. And based on that, real knowledge, specific knowledge about where to site a groundwater abstraction structure, a recharge structure, or a water conservation structure. And the second is participatory groundwater management, which Atal Bhujal Yojana is leading. So in my view, an amalgamation of both science and participatory movement is going to be the future.
Yeah. At any point in time, someone feels like saying something needs to be repeated or translated, please feel free. We have ample time, and we are a small group.
Okay. Okay.
Do you want me to ask him to repeat anything? No. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Shaman, over to you. The two trends that I could at least figure out from what Pratul has said, one is participation is on the rise. Pratul, is that correct? Participation is on the rise, and science being brought into action, right? So those are the two trends. What does your experience say?
Very similar, except I'll go one step before that. And I think I see a clear trend across geographies in terms of acceptance that water is mine versus water is ours. And some of these trends we witness in areas which are probably the most dramatic or drastic, and a lot of commentaries have happened on that. For example, in a state like Punjab, where for paddy, etc., there have been groundwater over extraction. That's a very well-known story. But now when you sit with the farmers, and they are, of course, a different category of farmers, and they have prospered through this, but now they are in their 60s and 70s. What the language you hear from them is very different. Because now they also realize, yeah, we've prospered, but the acceptance of the fact that it's not the water I've pumped out all my life was not just my own water, but it belonged to everyone, and this is something which is likely to hit our future generations. So that is the one bit that I would like to add to what Pratul just talked about. The acceptance, it's no longer denial, it's no longer, so that acceptance is slowly but steadily coming through. It is far quicker in the communities which are more remote or more hard-pressed. There it comes through faster. The ones, the communities which are not so, which have not been so stressed historically, for example, those in the Gangetic Plain and so on. But even then, now you see the heads nodding around this. So I think that is a big step forward.
Very interesting additional point. The notion of plenty leading to the notion of infinity. And so those are not learning fast enough. And those who are hard-pressed, they are learning. And they are shifting from mine to ours. Thank you, Sharman. Vishdeep, same questions, over to you. But I think in the first two responses, we did not get much on how's the governance changing on the ground.
Yeah, I was thinking about the same, Anuj. First of all, thank you for having me here. And before I start, I must say that I'm here with a sense of trepidation, because whatever I've learnt on water is because of the four people and the organizations you represent. I'm not a specialist on water, but working with the communities, working with other organizations that work on water is the basis of my learning on water. Having said that, I've followed the trend from last 15 years, basically. So on the question of water governance, let me come to it in the second part. But what I see as a trend clearly is that compared to 10 years back, the focus on water in general has increased a lot. I mean, both from a policy perspective as well as from civil society or citizens' point of view also. It's something that you can't ignore. Partly, I feel the reason for it is driven by policy. You can see the kind of investments that have come in through Jal Jeevan Mission, Atal Bhujal Yojana, specifically Atal Bhujal Yojana, because it's the first public investment program on groundwater that we've been striving for. Possibly the other reason could be triggered by the climate, because now it is, like Shravan says, that it's no longer a question of denial. I mean, we are living it, we are experiencing it, whether you are in the rural area, urban area, people can associate with whatever is happening on water. Bit populistically, कि आज गर्मी हो गया तो climate change की वजह से हो रहा है, flooding हो रहा है तो climate change की वजह से हो रहा है, but it is no longer, nobody is questioning the impact of climate change on water. These two are the trends that I see, and that is driving the popular imagination that we should think about water, engage with water. Does it lead to improved governance? That I am not very sure as of now, because if we understand governance to mean whatever we heard in the morning, that it combines all aspects of drinking water, groundwater, water for agriculture, वो दिखता नहीं है अभी. Although in terms of trend अगर बोलें तो there are two significant developments. One is the draft model groundwater bill of 2017, And why I am picking on that is rest of the experiments were civil society experiments, jiska legitimacy is always a question, but whatever came out as learnings and insights from those experiments is enshrined in the model groundwater bill. And I'll touch upon that bit late. And that is a significant movement that has led to, let's say, formulation of Atal Bhujal Yojana that is based on that bill. But in terms of overall governance at a village level, at a ULB level, that we heard from Usha also in the morning in the context of the urban, if we take lakes as a common, that value, that shared value proposition that we heard in the morning between various users of the common, how do you bring that about that can lead to a governance function? वो थोड़ा clear नहीं है अभी. Because we'll come back to the example of lake, which makes it very visible. Ki what exactly do we, why is it a common, and what does it take to manage that as a unit? And then if you expand that with in the rural areas, groundwater which is not visible like a lake, how do you govern that kind of a regime? So I think I'm sure we will hear on those aspects as we go along.
Fantastic, Bishdeep. You have at least provided an anchor to say 2017 draft bill and look at it from that plan. The other thing about the shared value proposition, I mean, those who attended the morning session and where Usha spoke of the lake as a common, I think the important point here is lake's pristine looks, I think, attract a lot of action. Well, does that happen to all kinds of other governance challenges? Does that invoke similar kind of participation? That remains an open question. And Vishdeep is not saying it, but I think his answer is, no, the governance doesn't seem to be improving as much. Vishdeep, I am putting words in your mouth.
I think it's there for everyone to see on the ground what's happening. But so to avoid repetition, that some of the things that comes up is for managing commons, community ownership is necessary. But then what triggers community ownership? Let's say in the lake example, I like the beauty of the lake. मेरे को jogging करना अच्छा लगता है. किसी को fishing उसमें अच्छा लगता है. किसी को देखने में सिर्फ अच्छा लगता है. But these are all very different perspective, value proposition. What ties all of us together to therefore come forward and create some norms and protocols to manage that lake is much more difficult for groundwater than for a lake which is invisible. So that is what I was trying to say. Trend में two things I missed out. One is, let's say 10 years के पहले तक civil society we used to work in our silos, government used to work in its silos. At best we used to talk at each other, but of late जितने भी government guidelines हैं, it talks specifically of civic engagement in some form. At least it's there in the guideline, it's there in Atal Bhujal Yojana, very specifically it's there in JJM that we have seen. But practically how it is translating, that I am just to be very candid, laying it out that it tries to instrumentalize it. It's not in the nature of what we heard from Usha or what we heard from the other panelists in the morning. That requires a very serious, deep engagement, which is long-term, which is based on mutual respect. But at least it recognizes a need for it. How it is translating into action is, maybe as we go along, that will improve. That is the other trend.
That expansion was very useful. Thank you. Yes, Joy. Trends as well as opportunities and then challenges. I know saying we might have a tendency to gravitate towards the challenges. Yeah.
I agree with all the other panelists said, so I don't want to repeat that. So I just want to put up a few issues which I think is important when we talk about water and SDG as such, and especially water as commons. So the first question I have in my mind is that when we say water is common, what does that mean? Because there I want to draw from what Professor Manotia ji said in the just the session before us. I think the whole question of property relationship and tenurial rights is very important when we talk about commons, and especially water as commons. Because water operates under different property regimes, and I think we should accept that. Especially surface water, dams, public, all that, generally operates under more like a public property regime, because either it is state-owned or there are smaller bodies which are maybe community-owned and things. But when we talk about groundwater aquifers, it is primarily operates under the private property regime. So I think when we talk about water as commons, how do we actually reconcile these issues related to property rights? So some of us, even many of us have been using the word water as a common pool resource. Irrespective of the property rights, especially this is true with groundwater. If you have to really see that groundwater is used sustainably, equitably and other things, then probably we need to treat groundwater and water as common pool resource, irrespective of the property rights. I think this is one distinction I'd like to make. And then we need to examine what does our policies, the legal framework, and the institutions talk about. And this is a big challenge for us to bring in. And many of the, except the model groundwater bill which he mentioned, which came out in 2016-17, almost all other acts which have come out on groundwater treats groundwater as a private property. At the most, these people prescribe some type of distance to be kept from public, other type of thing. But primarily, they are working under. So I think one of the challenges which all of us face is that how do we bring in groundwater, especially into a common pool resource framework, so that it can be treated as this, so that it can be sustainable, because many of us share the same aquifers, for example. It operates more like an open access resource today. That's why the whole degradation takes place. So I think we need to, as a society, engage with this issue, and I don't think we have the right answers the way about it. The second, Vishwadeep, this, and we talk about IWRM, Integrated Water Resource Management. All the policy documents today talk about, it is more of a rhetoric. I don't think there is a single example in the country to talk about, even at a sub-basin or a basin level, to say, oh, we have something highly attempted in this. We have been talking about this. And we still operate under silos, policy-wise, legally, and institutionally. If you look at the type of institution which we have to deal with the different aspects of this. And that is what Mihir Shah committee recommended when he talked about this whole institutional restructuring he talked about CWC and CGW, etc., but this where you have an integrated institution right up to the, let's say, watershed or micro watershed level. So how do we get out of these silos thinking? I think this is something which all of us need to think about it, especially we have to treat that. The third thing which I like to put it for discussion is that there's a transition from MDG to SDG. MDG actually talked about some targets saying that by 2015 or something, if I'm not mistaken, we need to halve the people who don't have safe drinking water or sanitation, etc. But this transition is very important to take note of. SDG, which has got, I think, 6 aspects to the whole thing. So you are not limiting only to drinking domestic water or sanitation issues. We are talking about water quality. We are talking about water use efficiency. And connecting that with the less withdrawal or sustainable withdrawal of the water, either from the aquifers or from the river systems and things, and making this water available to scarce regions and people who have no access and things. The fourth dimension is that we are talking about integrated water resource management. And also, we are also talking about protecting the ecosystems related to water, whether it is forests, whether it is rivers, lakes, aquifers, etc., etc. But here my complaint is that very often, though this transition has taken place, our mindset is still operating under MDG regime, because the whole constituency is mobilized in India. If you see, these are the people or the organization of the constituency which is primarily working on drinking water and sanitation, and there is very little talk about the other dimensions which SDGs bring about. So I think this is something we need to re-articulate and reposition ourselves if you have to be meaningfully engaged with SDG goals as a whole. And also talks of trade-offs and synergies. Otherwise, we end up supporting huge destructive projects in the name of providing drinking water. The Supreme Court, when they gave the verdict on the Sardar Sarovar project, the whole project was justified, saying that the drought-prone regions of Kutch, Saurashtra, etc., should get water, and under the Article 21 of the right to life and things, these people are. But they don't think about what happens to the Adivasis who got displaced. Do they have no right to life or livelihoods and things? So I think SDG's strength, I feel, is that it is trying to give us a framework in which we can see all this in a holistic manner. Otherwise, a dispersed need like drinking water has to be met through water grids, for example, massive projects. Jal Jeevan Mission, I have seen in Maharashtra, village after villages, truckloads of pipelines come and fall there. No village committee is formed to discuss and these things. So these are all reality which you need to look at when we talk about, this whole SDGs and other type of things. This is one of the contexts which I find we need to bring into discussions. The last point which I want to make is that, we are talking about the type of changes which is seeing. One of the things which is seen is that there's an institutional re-articulation coming up. There are more participatory spaces which are created in terms of water use associations, for example, in the case of irrigation projects or public irrigation and things, or Pani Samidhis, etc., which is being taken up. Now, there are a lot of problems with it. I don't want to get into that because various studies shows that, even water use associations are also being captured by, let's say, what generally called the elite capture into some of these institutions. But there are certain strengths also. So how do we, the civil society, engage with some of these institutions which are opened up and things? The other trend which I find is that the increasing trend towards privatization of different types. There are source and right privatization which is taking place in Maharashtra, for example, in 2005. I'm just finishing with this, okay. The Maharashtra Water Resources Regulatory Authority Act came into place, and there's a provision within that saying that across different users, you can trade the water. It is something like in Australia or Murray-Darling, which is become the, the talking point of all the policymakers today. Murray-Darling is the type of a darling for all of us, where there's a complete, what you call trading. Like a stock exchange. If I want to put my money into so much of water from that basin, I can put it and sell it like this. This is also coming into, to some extent, into the water sector in India in a limited manner, but this is happening, we need to take note of that. Along with that, there is also regulatory authority, independent regulatory authority being brought into water. Independent water regulatory authorities are important because then you're saying that the political and the executive, so you have a third type of thing to regulate some of these things or monitor things. So far, so good. But it's also being brought into with the understanding that private players are going to come into here, so you need a body to regulate this. So I think this is something which we are talking about, water as human rights, water as part of SDG, water as commons. So my question is that whether it is source privatization, right privatization, or the type of PPP projects are coming into various towns and things, are they in sync with when we talk about water as commons? I think this is something which we need to seriously debate and get some nuanced answers. I'm not saying that it's all black and white and things. We need to get into that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Joy. You really sort of widened the spectrum and horizons of the conversation. I would actually reiterate 2-3 points that you made. One is the larger framework, saying is the groundwater and surface water being treated similarly? Are we moving in the direction of tradable water rights, like Murray-Darling example? Or even the thinking saying the bulk of the NGO sector, this discourse is actually focused on providing the supplying side of the water and sanitation services. Is it really looking at the demand management in its full scope? With all of that, I'm sure saying audience is getting a full picture of saying what all is there when we start talking about water as commons. It's not even actually defined or accepted position. It's a position that a bill takes, but is that a position that practice is operating on? And the clear answer seems to be emerging from the panelists is no. Yes, there are trends, and there are very interesting trends that each one of you have picked up. Now, building on this conversation, I would actually, Joy, I was going to come to you last, but now I am trying to come to you first because no. So there is a reason I'm coming to you, because I think I'll come to you last again in the third round. Don't worry. So the question on the intersection of research and practice. What are some of the things that you believe that, especially, to me, what becomes very challenging is to imagine that, let's say you have a Manrega which tries to do the water recharge structure, but that's at village level. Then you have the, decades of the watershed program that might be looking at 2 or 5 gram panchayats or 10 gram panchayats at a single go. And then you have things like river basin level planning, right? What is being done? And from the research standpoint, not even necessarily from the practice standpoint, to integrate these different approaches. And do you see a positive forward movement?
Anybody can disagree with me. This is not an issue. This is my personal view, which I'm holding on this. But I think watershed development is no more in the horizon. This is my humble statement. Over the last 10 years or so, I think watershed has gone out of the frame for, especially for the state and the governments and things, because there is no dedicated program today which talks about. Earlier we had, at least under the Rural Development Ministry and the Ministry of Agriculture, you had dedicated programs which supports money coming from the center and an equivalent amount to be put from the state, to take up watershed-based type of development planning implementation. And I think that approach, though considerable amount of efforts and energy have been spent on it and a lot of learnings it has generated, but I think probably that program either is subsumed under certain other things. In Maharashtra, we have moved to a very quick fix solutions to this, because watershed development takes more time, 5 years, 7 years, and other type of a thing. But everybody wants quick results. So one of the answers which we have found in Maharashtra, we means not people like us, but it has got a government sanction and money put into it, called Jalayukta Shivar. I'm sure some of you might have read about it and things. What does Jalayukta Shivar do? The guidelines are very interesting. Like, it follows more or less like the watershed development guidelines. It's a very, risk to value development and interventions and all type of thing, institutions and things. But what actually happens today is that there are three things: river stream deepening, widening, and where the riparian vegetation, everything is there, the bunds are stabilized and things, you're now excavating all that, and there is something called river straightening. Now, it's a property of the river itself to, meander, go, all that, but today it is being, I have some visuals today, you can see, we are just destroying the river systems. And even the very, what you call significant NGOs, they have put a lot of efforts into watershed development, are also getting into this. Today, in some of the NGOs with whom I had respected and, had shared a very close relationship and friends, you can see 10, 20, 50 earth-moving machinery standing in their premises, because they are the ones who have been put into the streams to excavate and things. And this also partly is because, it's not finding fault with anybody, anything, but since you are in an open discussion, it's also all of the CSR money coming into the sector of water. It's also pushing NGOs to take up this type of quick fix solution type of approaches. We don't ask questions. We are no more critical about what our intention, what is going to lead to. I think this is the first point we like to make when we talk about watershed-based intervention, how do we take it up and things. Yeah. And I think all of us need to be equally concerned about this. And this is leading to what nowadays people call climate maladaptation. Because the measures which are putting in to see that to adapt to changing climate and things, in the long run, it's going to bite us. So I think as civil society, as academics, as concerned people, we need to take a very critical stand. Where do we, we need to. Otherwise, there is a phrase called, thinking like the state. We are all become extensions of that. I think the whole space of the civil society is to have that critical thinking, which I think getting compromised over time, and that can have a lot of implications for our natural resources and the communities which are dependent on this resource and things.
So Joy, is research doing enough to highlight these possibilities of biting back, or what can be done more? I
think there is now awareness among the researchers and things to look at maladaptation very much more critically. There's a global literature growing on this. There's one paper which I'm also co-author, which is just brought into now, published and things. So there is some engagement with that type of issue which is taking place, but that's not sufficient. I think all of us need to look into that, and in our own context, whatever the micro context we work and things, we need to critically look at what are the type of intervention which is being promoted, and whether they are really adaptive, or it is leading to other type of trade-offs and things, is something which we need to look into things. The second issue is that when we talk about watershed development, the lessons which you have learned is that, again, I want to come back to that property regime question. Because in watershed-based development, what we essentially are doing is that the surface flows, we are trying to suppress that surface flows and trying to recharge. Basically, you recharge the aquifers. But very seldom talk about that. In that process, we are also changing the property relation of the water. So the successful cases, now for example, I know about Hivre Bazaar in Maharashtra, which has been very well talked about, or any other successful things is where we have been able to craft institutional rules and norms to regulate the groundwater use. And they did not talk about equity, but they brought in two things. One, Today, I think our friend, lady from the first session from Rajasthan talked about no borewells for irrigation. This is the community accepted today. If you go to Hivre Bazaar, even now, after 20 years, 30 years, you can see that the couple of borewells you find is only for drinking water, not for irrigation. Second, water-intensive crops. I mean, they said that no sugarcane, no banana and type of thing, but this is one of the most prosperous villages I have seen. And when there are continuous drought years, I can see tankers going out of Hivre Bazaar to other villages. So, when we say about watershed-based development, we also need to see some of the contradictory things and how do we craft institutional rules so that they can have a semblance of common pool resource and things. That's the thing. The third thing is that when you move to a higher scale and things, there are much more complications. And even if we talk about micro watershed development, and very often we say it's a very innocent type of intervention, but since water is a contiguous, interrelated, interconnected resource, it has got different scales, any scale of intervention we make can have a basin-wide impacts. There are cases or studies shows that downstream flows have reduced in some places because we are using now a whole lot of extraction. And there's something called a pumping race which is taking place. People feel that with watershed development, whole lot of aquifers get filling. So what he said about aquifer mapping, try to understand what's that about, how much is the recharge which is taking place. Are we regulating our use within the recharge water is something which needed to, otherwise it can so lead to basin-wide problems and things. So how do we take that? And the moment you go a little higher up, then other contradictions and conflicts come. Now, intersectoral use becomes very critical. In Maharashtra, for example, we have seen that whole lot of water is going out of the rural to the cities today. Prayas done a good study in the last 7-8 years. They have studied 51 small medium and larger dams. Nearly 2,000 million cubic meter of water has gone out of the rural and the agriculture to the urban things. Palghar, there is a Surya irrigation project which was primarily constructed for providing irrigation to tribals of Palghar district. The whole money has come from the tribal sub-plan. Today, 70 to 80% of the water goes to Vasai Virar. So these are also contradictions the way we move up in the scale. And I don't think we have enough experience today. That's what I said. We are talking about IWRM where these issues could have been tackled. We really don't have a lived experience of that, and we need to get into that.
No, thank you, Joy. I mean, I think you've given a couple of examples. Now, Vishdeep, this gives me the reason to come to you next. What's in your experience? Like, how do we build these partnerships between the state actors and the market and the civil society organization? What can help us avoid some of these blind spots, making same mistakes again, and sort of strengthen the institutional structure, which are not only project-oriented, they are beyond the project and the longer. Because one of the things that Joy has very clearly articulated, MDGs were, let's not talk about the M part of the millennium, but the SDGs are very clearly supposed to be sustainable, right? We are not just trying to achieve a number. We want to achieve that number and sustain there, right? So what kind of partnerships need to be built between the different kinds of actors?
Right, Anuj. So I think, I don't know if we need to question the premise itself first before we move on to answer that. Because as an NGO that is being, we are being regularly being asked that question. Let's say between why is community ownership necessary? Like in the case of the water grids example, there is no need of community. So it's a very centralized approach where as long as the community gets the water provided by the state, let's say, or gets a tap in JJM's case, which can easily be laid. There is no need really of community ownership. So that is on one side, the question keeps coming. The other, that's why I thought about this question, and I again go back to the model groundwater bill, because that answers a lot of questions. Coming to the question of partnership itself, because if you see the preamble of the bill, it says very clearly, I mean, what Joy mentions about the property right, that's the first time that it delinks water rights from land rights, which has not been the case so far. And it clearly states that groundwater is held by the state in public trust to be used by its various users. So that's a common pool resource. Nobody is owning that water. Who owns the water? Nobody owns it. But everybody has a right to use it. And that's the characteristic of commons. You can't stop people from using it without getting into a fight, basically. Then it goes on to say that because it's a common pool, it has got multiple users and users, and it also identifies the allocation priorities. Starting with, it clearly says that the first right goes to right to life, and water is linked to, there's no right to water. What right to water is linked to right to life, and that is for drinking. And then it goes to other competing use of agriculture, which is the right to food. But clearly, once the drinking water need is taken care of, only then you move to right to food. And then it is to industry, and then for ecological services. Now, I had initially mapped these to the various SDGs, and except for 2, 3, it covers all. And it's a relatively less interesting topic to get into and tagging it to SDGs. But people in this room, it is not hard to link, let's say, drinking water, water for agriculture, water for industry, and ecological sources to most of the SDGs that we heard about in the morning. But does it mean that the problem is solved? It is not. It's there on paper. And then we come back to the question of why is it important that groundwater, especially, it is very localized. It exists. That's what we have seen. Ki peninsular India mein, the way groundwater exists in its aquifer is very different. It exists in West Bengal, which is alluvial, where we work. In Bihar, we have seen that on one side of the road there is arsenic. On the other side of the road, there is no arsenic. And the measures include, like, you have to identify a safe source for arsenic. So essentially, to say that there is the centralized way of thinking, centralized way of planning to govern water, especially groundwater, will not work. And this is laid out very clearly in the Model Groundwater Bill. And it also suggests some principles of managing this common pool, which links to therefore the need for partnerships. Like one of the principle is the principle of subsidiarity, which says that decision making related to at a village level, if it can be done at that level, doesn't need to be done at a higher level, let's say at a block or a district. So that it recognizes the contextuality of the problem that exists in the villages, and it tries to address that. The other principles are that a hydrological unit should be the unit of management, whether it's at a basin level or it's atomized at a aquifer level. Uske alawa hoga nahi. That is the reason why decentralized governance is needed. And for decentralized governance, it is the local people who are the managers of that resource need to be part of the equation for managing it. It holds true at the unit of a lake. It holds true at the unit of a village, where if there is a way to understand the aquifer quantity, then we have seen what we heard from the lady from Rajasthan, that people take rational decisions which are difficult to impose centrally. And we have heard these examples from across the country that you can't dig a irrigation borewell deeper than your drinking water borewell. Because in the drought season, if it dries up, your drinking water source should be the last to dry up, and that should be protected. And people tend to make these hard choices if the data is placed on them, in front of them, including putting moratoriums of new borewells, changing cropping patterns for demand management, like we've seen in Atal Bhujal Yojana, etc., which can only be possible if water is governed in a decentralized way. The provision for which is also there in the 73rd Amendment. And the last thing is that we should move away from seeing this in a project mode. Like in a mission mode, it comes and goes. In Swachh Bharat mission, for example, some 3 lakh Swachhagrahis were created. And then they disappeared. Then Jal Jeevan mission comes and identifies a fresh set of lack of functionaries, trains them again, and the mission gets over, and then they disappear into thin air again. So that mission, water is not a one-time. Water governance is a recurring activity, and the vision should be to create the institutions that are nested at a basin level, that can cater to multiple uses of water, not just one, like groundwater, surface water. More recently, I think there is a recognition that wastewater or used water should be brought into the equation as one water, including the rainfall. So IWRM mentions all these as a principles, but to translate it on the ground at scale, which becomes the challenge. Partnerships I've still not answered, Anuj. Sorry,
I was going
I'm
to say,
taking a bit
come on, I need to
longer.
save time for others.
So from our experience, so I was trying to say that it is a no-brainer to say that partnerships are needed. From our work on the last 15, 20 years, partnerships between government, non-government, academic, we've seen how it pays off handsomely. Why does it happen? If we all acknowledge, the question I would like to change is that instead of asking is partnerships needed, if it is needed, what stops it from happening? What stops people from coming together to manage water as a commons? So that is the question that keeps bugging all of us at scale. Is then the complexity changes, because at local levels, in few villages, few blocks, all of us working in the civil society have seen it works. That you use data, you use training, you mobilize the community, they know their resource. So once they get together, they are in a well equipped to take those decisions. At scale, it doesn't happen, and that's where we as NGOs run into the trouble of that if we choose to work very locally, then the accusation is that these are islands of successes which never scale. There is a value in itself for doing that. But if we try to scale and see government as the biggest customer for scale and try to improve the systems of the government to enable scale, the only way to do that is through the techno-managerial approach, where it involves people management and bringing in toolkits, something that you've written about, and we are acutely aware of that. But there is no solution otherwise. If you want to make this water governance that at a small scale that has been demonstrated by many NGOs sitting in this room or even outside, scale it into 100, which is the need of the hour, because we can't wait, because the SDGs is prompting us to act with a sense of urgency. I don't see a possibility or a pathway that can be done without following a techno-managerial approach. Which
What I'm hearing you say is saying the time constraint being put is saying, okay, take a techno-managerial position and just quickly sort of literally bulldoze the whole thing, right? Instead of allowing the local governance to take its own course.
Absolutely. So
But
time constraint is one. I am not sure if it's the only one, Anuj. The other is the partnership. So if we recognize that the partnerships are needed wherever success has happened, how does policy respond to that need? Why is it that every time a lake has to be restored, people have to go through the same struggle? Because we know that the struggle comes from knowing who owns the lake, where are the papers or the plans for the lake. Nahi milta. On the other hand, whether it's at the rural level, watershed development or a participatory groundwater management, where things have been demonstrated successfully through partnerships, why doesn't the policy trigger or try to at least remove the barriers that can enable this
I
partnerships
think
to
you're
happen?
raising a question, but you're also partly answering the question. The question he is framing or reframing is to say, oh, if we know saying there are such great advantages of these partnerships, then the real question to ask is why those partnerships don't happen on their own, right? And I'm not sure whether you want to hazard an answer, and I need to go to the next panelist. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Vishdeep, but we'll come back to you. Sharman, I think you heard both Joy and Vishdeep take a policy level, macro level view, but at the same time, in your foundation, working with the partners on the ground, you have seen both in save more as well as use less, you've seen the gains on the ground. Now, do you have lessons or insights of saying, is there a different dynamics in trying to save more or in trying to use less, or is the same dynamic, same structuring, same rules that apply to cause that governance level change on the ground? Over to you.
Okay, I'll be brief. So before you save more, you need to know more. So it's know more, save more, and use less. And I'll just link up I'll give some anecdotal evidence, which I think which shows the things which are happening on ground. And all of them link with a particular SDG, which is often not talked about in the context of water. And that is SDG 5, which is on, anyone in the audience? Gender. Because all of us have seen beautiful pictures of women carrying pots of water
On
and
that count,
paintings,
this being an all-men
which tells you,
panel,
have you ever seen a man carrying a big pot of water? Or when there are water shortages, when people are queuing up. So that tells you whether it's urban or rural, the pressure of water, and therefore the pain of water in all its dimensions comes to the woman. So I'll talk very briefly about a few other stories. One is, I think, a wonderful water game which has been developed by FES, and I've seen that being played. And you see, especially when women are also participants, how they take a much longer view. It is almost like a business board game that you play, where you play over multiple rounds. Obviously, in round one, you win if you kind of use all the water and you've made a lot of money. But it's going to come back and hit you in round two and round three. And then the way that you can see the light dawning on the audience participation. And again, it links back to that earlier point I made about awareness. So therefore, anything about micro-governance, Sun starts with awareness. Once this happens, the next stage where women again are taking the lead, and we've had some wonderful experiences in Gujarat with some of the programs that we support with Viksat, and now with expanding to Maharashtra, is on simple concept of water budgeting. That how much are you getting in and how much are you spending out? Not everything can be measured. We really don't know what the aquifer availabilities and so on. But there are certain dimensions which can be measured, and you'll be surprised at the level of numeracy that the most affected people, which is typically the female gender, how actively they pick it up, and then they are the ones who drive that, and then you burn what you earn, kind of a logic starts falling in place. Similarly, in some of the tribal tracts of West Bengal, the vestiges of the Chota Nagpur plateau, the uplands were all barren. Downlands were where the cultivation was. And the moment the uplands, which are commons, then you realize that if that is not maintained, you will not have enough water flowing in. And again, who takes the lead in governing and making sure the uplands are protected so that the water kind of funnels them? It's again the women, it's the tribal women. So they will teach you more contour maps than your geography teacher could teach you in school. So they have enough number and many more. And so if it comes around and if we still have time, I'll be happy to narrate as many as you like. But these are the changes in governance which are happening. The local governments are picking it up at the block level and below. You know, at the village panchayat level, Gram Sabha level, there's huge recognition for all this which is coming through. It'll be some time before the entire part bubbles up. But clearly, in water budget, one state which has made news has, of course, been Kerala, which at least has recognized, and at least in certain parts has even put it as part of their annual thing. So I think the steps are in the right direction. It's going to take time, but it's also more organic. But I think it helps for all of us to realize when we talk of commons and so on, that everyone is not equally impacted. There's 50% of the population gets disproportionately impacted, and they are the most responsive to change, and they are also showing some pathways.
Well said. Thank you, Shraman. Pratul, coming to you, I know saying I was supposed to come to you right after Joy earlier, but I think saying this way, the conversation now is richer, and my questions to you are going to make more sense. So now Atal Bhujal Yojana is one of the flagships program, right? I mean, it's not like Jal Jeevan Mission, but it's let's say, 80 district is the second largest scale I would know of, right? And this is the one scheme that looked at the demand management. This is the one scheme that looked at demand management via community-led institution creation on the ground. Would really love to understand your view. How successful, where are the successes, what are the insights, what are the learning? Because ultimately the question at the end, in the next round, is going to be about a scale. So over to you.
I mean, when this scheme was conceived, the task was very clear. I mean, over the years, we have been focusing on supply side interventions. We had Manrega, we have IWMP, we have watershed conservation programs, each and everything. There was no sustained focus on demand side management. I mean, if you look at the situation at the resources in Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, if you cover entire area with water recharge, artificial recharge or conservation structures, the stage of groundwater development is not going to improve beyond a certain point, which has already reached 200, 300 or even 400%. So the only solution is to use less. Coming to challenges, biggest challenge was to get the scheme on the ground. On the ground. Biswadeep is here. Biswadeep knows the challenges that we faced. Conceived in 2015, implemented in 2020, in the middle of COVID lockdown. So these were some of the factors. But then, the design of the scheme is such that, it was full of challenges. It's a World Bank aided scheme, and they funded it under a new instrument, which is called as Program for Result. So that means the state will only get money if they achieve certain predefined targets, which are to be verified by an independent verification agency. This was a totally new concept. It still is now. The state not understanding कि उनको मिलेगा क्या, और कब मिलेगा, कैसे मिलेगा. As an auxiliary, when you go in for a P4R project, you are supposed to follow your own procurement rules. In other World Bank programs, the World Bank program procurement rules, they are the norms. But in P4R, Government of India or state government rules, they are to be followed. So when you have different states, 7 different states, 7 different type of procurement rules, so it led to, something of a delay. And the third point, working with the community. We had absolutely no idea how to proceed. But then we had CSOs, we had Aragyam, Sudeep was there, Mala was there. They literally hand-holded us. All those manuals, how to participate, how to win the trust of the community. One thing which I would like to say when you are, implementing this type of program is that you need to have passion, you need to have persistence, and you need to have patience. Without it, you cannot succeed. Coming specifically to community, we focus on behavior change. That is change from the current mindset of consumption to groundwater management. This, is very gradual and very time consuming. Unfortunately, all government schemes, they have a time frame. We know that this process cannot be achieved, this process of behavior change, but we are doing our best.
You mean cannot be achieved
Fully, yes.
Sorry, continue.
But then we have got, a very systemic, very intensive training programs at the Gram Panchayat level, IC campaigns. Of course, Sharmanji has said about the water games of FES, and I would also like to say about the CLART app which they have, and which is being used in Karnataka and other states. We have also got an MOU with FES for using their application and techniques. Second, we wanted to involve women. Without women, no program of such magnitude can succeed. But then, there were challenges. There were some states, in certain parts of the state, they were simply hesitant to come out to training programs, to meetings. Whatever we could do, could never, have enough women in those training or meeting things. Of course, we have a mandate of having 33% of women in the VWSC, in the participatory ground management committees and all that, but those numbers are met. But on the ground, there was some, issues.
If I were to borrow the terminology from the second session where Ms. Niaji made a comment saying the processes,
Yeah.
super important. The indicators of saying, okay, so many people are trained versus so many of them were women and they did X number of activities and stuff like that, right? So the processes always kind of get diluted and that's where the results are kind of half realized. Understood when we are doing something at this scale, but I'm sure saying we also look at this, saying this is the realistic situation, how do we take a constructive view to say, let's make it better next time. So now I think in, being mindful of the paucity of time, I just want to give each one of you 1 minute, but the thought or the question that you are responding to is, so what is the one thing that you would suggest for water governance to be more strongly placed in the communities? What is one thing that you would suggest needs to be done, right? You could say it about Atal Bhujal Yojana, you could say it about civil society, the way the direct programs are being implemented. You can say it about Jal Jeevan Mission, or you can say it about, the larger IWRM and the draft bill context, right? So over to you, Pratal.
Atal Bhujal Yojana has been launched in rural areas only. And there's a reason for that. Because groundwater, 86% of groundwater is used for irrigation. And agriculture is out of ambit of all our regulations. We have CGWA guidelines, we have SDWA guidelines, we have guidelines for industries, for domestic, but there's no guideline for agriculture. And the only model that comes is self-regulation. Empower the community, give them the power of data that is democratic, data that is decentralized, data that is demystified. And it works. If you prove your point with data that is collected by the community, they will realize the gravity of the situation and the solutions will come from them. You don't have to give them solutions. That is what I have seen, and that is what I firmly believe in.
Thank you. Well said. Sherman, your point about no more seems to be resonating here. Empower the communities with information. But what more would you say?
Echo a lot of that. I think spread a lot more of the positive stories, because there are success stories. They have to be talked about a lot more. And there's no point in talking doom and gloom. You have to talk about the positive stories. And second, that I win does not mean that you have to lose. We all have to win together, and I think communities understand that better. And as long as we can get this even across communities and across geographies, there's nothing better than to change the mood and to change the entire feeling that it goes. So once the one-upmanship goes, a lot of these things will fall into place. So spread the positivity.
And measure it. So two things, Anuj. So, एक अगर at water governance, so the main challenge is that if water has to be governed based on the principle of commons, the challenge becomes how do you ensure the integrity of that idea, which is what we see that when you fragment it, when agriculture department relates to that water, those principles go out of the window because the objectives are at cross purpose. You have to increase the productivity for which there is need for more water. If there is minor irrigation dealing with groundwater, their KRA is very different, and there also the integrity of managing groundwater as a commons, it goes. So for want of any clear idea, what we've seen to work is the water budget, possibly. That I think many of the organizations here, Shravan's own partners, there is Samarth here, your experience in Gujarat, Chhattisgarh, is Valli Vasan, FES. One thing that has worked is as an instrument, as a tool. Ultimately, we come back to the question of tool when we deal with masses. that water budget, it triggers behavior change. It responds to both supply and demand. If that can be institutionalized into a 73rd Amendment mentioned institution, it just to protect it from temporal projects and build capacity of the people to prepare that water budget. Possibly that could be one way out for water governance. The second is, of course, if we are saying that partnerships are needed to make things work, recognize that in policy and institutionalize that in its operations. And these partnerships can be of various forms, I mean, basically.
Yes, Joy.
Yeah. I just want to first respond to Vishwadhi, my friend, because twice he said that, which gives an impression that I am against any type of techno-managerial approach or tools and things, which is not true. My contention there is that nowadays there is a tendency to technify everything. Even highly social issues or distributory issues or justice issues being technified, saying that, okay, you bring in the new technologies or tools and things it can solve, which is not true. So technologies, even we also do work on digital technologies today to aid, help the water use associations today. So my only contention is that, the social processes should decide what technologies and where it becomes useful and things, so we forget the other part of it. That's only my contention there. The other two suggestions which I have is this. I think we also need to talk about when we, I think the reference is not coming fully, when we talk about SDGs, water and commons and things. I think this whole changing world today, and in which the biggest change which is taking place, which has got a whole lot of impacts, not only on water, but even society as a whole is, let's say, climate change. So, and I think we should accept that we have very impartial knowledge systems. So I think probably because we are also living in a world of uncertainties. So we should take a much more humbler approach in terms of our interventions and things that, that's why I brought in the issue of maladaptation here. So I think understanding even from a micro to macro level how this is being played out. And we need to invest in that, not in terms of money alone. Money is important, but along with that, our time, energy, passion into that. Try to understand even our micro context how this is being played out. And then coming out some intervention, I think is very important because our knowledge itself is very impartial. So what he talked about, whether it is subsidiarity or even precautionary principle. So that even if we fail on the safer side. I think so. I think it should make us humble in our intervention, going for more and more nature-based and working according to the contours of the nature is important. So one of the places which I'll make all the people here is that all of us have been working on different elements of water. Like I work on, let's say, public irrigation systems, trying to reform it, etc., etc. Amy working on, let's say, drinking water, maybe Atal Bhujal Yojana. Some people are working on water quality issues or river basin scale. Ranjan is sitting here. His work on Mahanadi, for example. There are people working on water conflicts and different type of contestations. So I think we all need to come together and at least take up, and we have not got our answers right. This is my humble, after spending 40 years in water sector, today when I look back and the type of challenges we find, we still don't have this. So can we not take up in wherever we are at a scale, let's say at a sub-basin scale or something, where all these issues play out? Whether it is intersectoral allocation, whatever is prioritization, institution, whatever institutions are you going to craft, if you are saying that we need to get out of the silos and things, a nested institutional framework, which is much more democratic platforms. Today we don't have that. Where people can come together, put the data together, experiences, informations, and also negotiate across this. So can we not think about creating such areas, at least if you talk about India, at least about 10, 15 places where we work at that level and learn from it, and then maybe come. So I would urge very seriously, going up a little more of the micro watershed type of context, because I feel water is both a local and a non-local resource. There are certain critical biophysical characteristics of water. If you have to capture all that. Now, for example, very often in the NGOs we say that water is a local resource, which I say is only partially true. If you are talking about the basin level processes and things, water is also a non-local resource. And they need to interact. So micro-macro interactions are important. And lastly, also the institutional framework, we need to get it right. So I think it's important that we work at that scale. All of us put our skills, our knowledge, passion together and see over the next 3-4 years, can we create something where I think I would request the philanthropies, the other agencies, academic institutions, NGOs all to work together as a collective. I think that's only we can get a little better understanding than what we have. Yeah.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you. So guys, now I have the difficult job of summarizing all this, right? A lot has been. Yes, sure. And before that, can we take questions from audience? Yeah, okay. Is somewhere there with a moving mic? You can take this one if there is not.
Oh, there is one more mic.
We have one here.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Usha Thorat, who used to be the chairman of FES till about a year ago. I used to be Deputy Governor, Reserve Bank of India till 2010. It's been an extremely interesting discussion. And I think you almost have hit it, but I don't know why we are not confronting it. I think the point that was made that 86, and I thought the figure was 89% of water is used for agriculture and irrigation. And how can you separate any discussion on that from the discussion on water? And all this is taking me back to Professor Vaidyanathan, who years ago talked about pricing of water. We have followed a policy of power, free power for agriculture. We have followed a policy of totally supporting the water guzzling crops. We have followed a policy which has completely led to an overuse of water. The kind of seeds, the fertilizers, everything leads to overuse of water. Agriculture practices which lead to overuse of water. And here we are talking about water without basically confronting the fundamental, which is that the best form of governance is to really move over to market-related pricing. If you want to give subsidies, you have to give it directly to the persons for whom it's intended, but not through this kind of a way. Our agriculture trade policies have also tried to, in more recent times, manage inflation, and I'm saying that coming from Reserve Bank. And I don't see any real answer to India's water problem unless we fundamentally deal with how we are pricing power and how we are pricing water, what kind of subsidies we are giving for power, what kind of subsidies are we giving for fertilizer, what kind of subsidies are we giving for what? Irrigation. So to my mind, we are getting into worse and worse problems. And all the kind of examples that you have talked about today, which are all very relevant, and ultimately the water budgeting. The sequel to Sarjubai's story from Amartya is that when this water, she started doing no borewell for irrigation and went downstream, and all the women, her daughters-in-law and daughters who were in the downstream villages, started following the same philosophy downstream, and the water levels got actually improved way down, almost till Bhilwara, and you could see there was water being taken from the rural areas to the urban areas, and the federations there, which were working together, and then you think, my God, what is Sarjubai's grandson got to have an aspiration for? How on earth are you going to marketize this whole business? Can Bhilwara pay for that water? What is the water budgeting at a landscape level? Aren't these issues to be tackled with? And then I really don't know, I don't have the answers, but I know we have to deal with the problem of pricing. Thank
you.
So I think, great question. And in fact, when we were looking at the time and saying, should we bring the pricing and commoning, obviously, those could be looked at as two spectrums of the same problem being solved through, from two different directions. So Joy, in case you want to quickly respond, then. Yeah, maybe that's a good suggestion. If there are any other questions, yeah, please go ahead.
So my name is Lavanya. I'm a political ecologist and I work in BITS Pilani, Hyderabad campus. One issue I felt that the panel, which was absolutely wonderful, did not touch upon was scarcity and how scarcity is manufactured and is part of that idea of how access doesn't really depend on how much water it is, but there is a construction of scarcity that's happening. So I was wondering if you all could comment on that as well.
Great, thank you. There's a question in the front row here.
Hello, I'm Sebastian Rodrigues, representing National Platform of Small Scale Fish Workers, NPSSW. There is one thing I want to identify here from the session so far, and including this session. There has been only two references indirectly connected to SDG 14. It's life underwater.
Yeah.
One was regarding Bangalore. They say fish is dying. And now Vishwadeep Ghosh mentioned about somebody likes fishing. Other than that, there is no reference to the fishing, even though fishing communities are defined legally in international law of SSF guidelines as stewards of water bodies, of the ocean, of the seas, of the rivers. And I think this is something really, really not a good sign, first of all. And the second thing I want to share that the policy issues, particularly the orientation, currently we see, so I'm talking about freshwater bodies and dams, and Maharashtra that too, on the outskirts of Pune that we just visited. My colleague is here, Mr. Damse. The whole policy and orientation change in policy towards introducing contract system into doing fishing in the dams has actually created hostile situation for fishing communities. That people are being beaten up, people are being arrested, people are not being allowed to do fishing, prevented fishing. And mind you, these are not sanctuaries or dam sanctuaries or marine parks as such. These are simple dams. And the situation of things are even aggravated because the communities, Adivasis communities, that are so bad that they don't even know the dates on which they have been beaten up. I asked for in my course of investigation, found when was this incident happened. One lady told me her son was beaten up the day the river got flooded. I mean, so look at our situation. It's very, very extremely bad. It requires extreme attention. I just want to get the visibility to the issue of fishing and the fishing communities. Thank you.
I just want to add on. I was just thinking, I'm from FES. I've been working with Sajubhai for the last 28 years. I was just thinking, we need to understand water more than H2O. Actually, talking more about water literacy, the governance, and as ma'am mentioned about the transaction. The more we understand through water literacy, understanding more about water, and that's how the processes where Sajubhai was speaking about. So the more we understand about the transactions, and as you mentioned, it is very simple, common sense that you should not have a pipe deeper than the drinking water level. But that common sense is so uncommon. So how do we actually communicate that? And the alternative communications that can help us all of us.
Thank you. Another great question. Is there one more? Okay. Wow. Now suddenly I'm feeling we are a popular panel. Huh? Go ahead.
So in the entire conversation, there are a couple of things. One, in terms of talking about demand, supply, water budgeting, keeping a price on something. So are we looking at water and its usage and what it does in a very capitalist way of understanding of what water does to us, or how we interact with a natural resource? Are we looking at it in a very capitalist way as a product, as a give and take? That is one question I have. And the other one is 2 years ago I made a film on, speaking Neeruganti, where there is one person who is employed by the community who takes care of the lake, and is in charge of irrigating the command area of that lake. And he would tell the villagers what to grow and what not to grow. And the lakes were in great shape. And if you look at parts of Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, in Chikbalapur and Kolar, Tumkur region, those practices still exist. But the government is not taking those livelihoods seriously. So that is one of the reasons why we made the film in the first place. So is there something that as organizations, these things could also be looked into as where people took care of those lakes and, as a community decided as to what to grow, what not to grow and stuff like that?
See, See, I have no problem in taking one question from each of you. The only thing is we'll not have time to answer.
Yeah, that's a good.
That's all right. We can continue the discussions over tea. I come from power sector, and there are many similarities in water governance and power sector governance, including some of the underlying.
What's your good name?
Simran Grover, Center for Energy Environment People, Jaipur-based organization. Anyway, so a lot of similarities including the underlying paradigms of commoditization and privatization. I do have my reservations towards market play and pricing, especially because markets do not price everything or do not take everything into account. And there are issues of inequity we're still dealing despite subsidies being doled out left, right, and center. My question was, there was a comment from one of the panelists that there's an increasing recognition for the water problem, maybe perhaps in the CSO community at the largest society level, I'm not sure. And the question is, my observation in the context is, the infrastructure for water commons, for example, is changing. I come from a city for Jaipur. My colleagues tell me every 2 kilometers there used to be a Baudi, which is a step well. I work in large large renewable spaces, and look at some of the issues around it. And water is again an issue. And along with that, whatever happening around RE is one case, but the infrastructure of water, the traditional nadis, etc., Baulis have also been replaced, and including, you see more centralized infrastructure under Jal Jeevan Mission or whatever. Again, I don't understand these things very much as do in power sector. So that is reshaping our cultural relationship, our recognition of water resources or commons. Comments on that. Thank you.
So we should be getting ranked based on the questions. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so Vishwadip did mention about Samar. So I'm from Samar, Gazala. While we all were discussing about Bhujal Yojana and Nal Jal, there is Har Ghar Nal and all that. Something which is, I'm very disturbed about is that because of all the schemes that are coming in, some of the traditional things which you already touched upon, like, I work in Kutch and there is the whole tradition of vow. There's also when you go to I work in Chhattisgarh where there are Vedas. But everything is getting, there was a culture when people would come every month once, there are times when they would come together and they would look after those structures. They would maintain them. They would kind of rejuvenate them. Now everything is getting completely neglected. So how I want to ask this question to Atal Bhujal Yojana and other people. I'm sure there are no people from Nal Jal, Jal Jeevan Mission. But what happens? If such schemes are put in place, are they not? The communities are not in the center. A lot of people. You all spoke about women. Are women not in the center? So that's a question. Another thing, like we work in Chhattisgarh and we are looking at somebody is here working on Mahanadi. I don't know who is the person, but you are there. Yeah, Ranjan is here. Oh, Ranjan, you are here. Okay, right. I saw you now. So so we also work in the sub-basin of, Sakri River, where we are trying to understand the Mahanadi sub-basin. And we are looking at how the aquifers are behaving there. Because there's a lot of sugarcane factories there and a lot of sugarcane farming is happening. So what happened to the aquifer? What happened to the forest? Because the upland is forest and then there is downstream where there are people are working and they are extracting water. So these are some primary question. And one thing I didn't hear in the panel was about the animal husbandry. Because water also is, I come from Kutch, sorry about it. And when we talk about Kutch, you can't ignore animal husbandry, which is 40% of people are pastoralists. And for them, water, if there's no water, they won't survive because they don't need water only for drinking, but for their cattle. So that's what. Thank you.
Yeah. Shall I come and collect that?
Can take it.
Okay, yeah, we are going to need another 2 hours. Are you guys okay answering these questions? So I think all pertinent questions, and I see 1 or 2 question asking participants having moved from the room. But quickly, pricing is a big conversation, and I think Joy made a quick comment there, saying different water bodies or the different types of water is actually operating under different regimes. So groundwater is being treated more as a private because it's under your bore well, right? In piece of land that you own, that's sort of being shifted. Someone used the term saying, are we treating water as capitalist? I'm not sure, saying there is a commons conversation here. There's a capitalist, the market economy viewpoint in the country. The country is trying to grow at 7, 8%. Then all your natural resources are then locked into that paradigm, right? So you can't sort of walk away from that paradigm. Then there are similarities from a power sector and otherwise the pastoral communities needing it for livestock, and what happened to our bawdis and traditional ways of doing it. Obviously, what happened to our schooling system, right? When the collectors and commissioners' kid was also coming to the same school and the principal's kid, obviously the school standards were very different versus when you have the 4 layers of a school, what happens there we know, right? So similarly, the community, when there is a certain lifestyle being aspired to, someone asked about saying why agriculture pricing is not there. I mean, look at the food and the aspiration, right? More rice being eaten, more, I'm not coming from any kind of gyan-giving direction to say non-veg or veg, but yeah, non-veg does take more water, right? I mean, those kind of things, when you start looking at saying when an economy is growing, the water footprint is going to grow. Now, the point is, are there proportional responses to different usage level? And yes, agriculture is the biggest elephant in the room, but it's also not easy. Nobody is doing for the fun of it. I mean, just look at a farmer, have conversation with 10 of them, and they'll tell you saying they don't want to just throw away water, right? I mean, if they can save it for the 3rd crop, they would rather do it. But they are also sort of tied into or logged into this growth paradigm. I think a lot of these questions are not necessarily water questions, Joy. These questions, in my opinion, and to all panelists, I would want, if anyone wants to quickly respond, these are also the question of socio-cultural and political vision that we have for society to say where we want to go, what kind of life we want to have, right? I mean, it's not as simple to say, अच्छा कल से पानी कम इस्तेमाल करेंगे, right? अगर मुझको मेरा shower भी चाहिए और मुझको water tap भी चाहिए, then there is a problem. तो वो कल से नहीं हो पाएगा, right? मुझको जिसको बाजरा खाने वाली जगह से आता हूँ और अब रोटी भी आटे का चाहिए और चावल भी चाहिए एक टाइम, वो वैसा नहीं होने वाला. It's going to change. Right? So a lot of these things are interconnected. I don't think we can answer it, but still I want to, as a fair moderator, I want to give chance to all my panelists to quickly respond. Over to you, Joy. Quickly. It's the operating one.
Yeah, I think time is really a constraint. I think all the questions are very important, and it needs, as he said, he told me 2 days it would require to respond to all the questions. I don't know, we can have conversations even after the session. I think Usha is not here, who raised the issue about pricing. So probably then I'll talk to her, I think, or I don't think. But there are many other things. I think I completely agree with what Sebastian said, that there are very important issues related to water has not been talked about in the panel. For example, the whole issue of non-consumptive uses. Now that is the whole Fisher's thing, that certain water bodies need to be there. It's not the whole question of extracting and putting it for human uses and things, as agriculture or other type of industrial and other type of uses. There are, when you talk about right to water and things, we also need to talk about water bodies to be kept clean, flowing, so that fishers and other people who are dependent on those flows get their livelihoods and things. And also for the ecosystem itself. Today we talk about environmental flows. In India we talk about maximum extraction, minimum flows, but it should be the other way around. That I would like to connect with what you said, Simran, that this whole transition from a traditional society and the technologies and the science and society relationship to something what you call the modern thing today. And I think it's also part of a colonial contribution, the colonial legacy. This is my last response. I mean, others will respond to this. I think this is something which we need to take note of. Like India used to, any Oriental societies used to be very proud of the type of rich heritage we had about the traditional water harvesting, water use systems and things. And there has been a complete break from that. Now there are various reasons for it. Some people blame the colonial systems because they changed the entire tariff systems and blah, blah, and other things. But I think there is also something which we need to look at internally. For example, the whole caste. When we talk about traditional systems, there have been complete exclusion of certain sections and things. So that is something which you need to take a clue. But I think the important change is what we call in the European societies towards the end of 19th century, which got fully flowered in the 20th century, what you call the hydraulic mission. That is, 3 things came together. Scientism, that everything can be explained through rationality and science can solve everything. The whole ideology that humans can dominate and subjugate nature, and a technology to do it. The entire large irrigation systems, hydropower, evacuation lines, in terms of power sections, the huge canals and things, this have been all part of the hydrological mission which was set up, which Rohan D'Souza, who did his PhD on the Mahanadi, for example, the flood, talks about the colonial hydrology. I think we are still persisting with that, and interlinking of rivers is a classical example of this whole mindset. Though the European countries where hydrologic mission originated have given way to much more ecological understandings and reconnecting with the nature, I think we are still persisting with that. And this has reconfigured relations humans have with non-human species, water, and land and other type of, even culture and civilization and things. So I think this is something which we need to take note of and say that, so this is not accidental. These changes are taking place, and we need to see what can be done about it. All the other issues are important. Livestock you raised, and somebody, I think Lavanya also left, I think. Something about scarcity. Oh, you are there. I mean, my answer to you is that is two. Both is a scarcity to some extent manufactured, like Laila Mehta's writing and things about the whole thing. My slight difference is that water is both a biophysical resource, so there is an element of scarcity, especially people who live in those conditions know about it, and it's also cultural thing. So how do you do? So where equity and distribution becomes an important thing. Otherwise, if only scarcity type of a discourse drives more supply, augmentation. You create more and more water, and things. And today, per capita water storage is getting equated with water security. Like America has got 5,000 cubic meter water per person under dams. China has got 2,500. India has only 200. So go for more and more large dams and things. So I think we need to get out of this type of a discourse. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. No, every question is a good question. Obviously, this is not a magic panel to have all the answers, but I mean, shifting the word from water scarcity to water security changes the lens tremendously, and Joy just touched upon that, but lots more we can talk about. SDG 14, very exciting, and it's not just animal life, also plant life. I'm from the Makhana region of Mithra, so it's a superfood, changing lots more can be done. And of course, every form of livestock again gets linked back into how much do you have, how much can you use, and which one. So it goes back that even if you have a cow, even today, and even in an area like UP, if you give the cow, it's a proven fact, you give the cow 3 times water, it will yield better milk than if you get 2. But who's going to get that water and kind of do it? It's again boils the villages are empty of men, of able-bodied men. I mean, they are all working in the city. There's so many dimensions to it. I mean, these are things for an endless dialogue, but thank you so much for at least provoking these questions, and really grateful for that.
Anything quickly? Because the government got asked directly. You're representing us in Bhutan.
I mean, simple thing is, you should know the answer. We at Delhi won't know why the people have turned their, things away from their vows. Look at it. We had hand pumps, stand posts. We neglected our dug wells. Now, we have our tap connections, and I don't know what else we'll forget and destruct. Coming back to the thing, please don't view water as a technical aspect only. It has a social connotation, it has a religious connotation, it has an environmental connotation, it has behavioral connotation, and each of these aspects needs separate sessions in themselves only. So
we need a separate water convening, not common convening. Okay. Vishdeep? Yeah, of course.
Why I said the 2 days, because, the question Arjun, you asked, or what Madam Thorat or Sebastian in many, different examples, but takes us to the question of, your question is clearly related to equity and justice, and so are possibly others. And in some ways we are aware of it. We get into the arena of political economy, possibly that holds an answer, and discussion into that takes much more longer. Because the question of energy, why is water subsidized, why is energy subsidized, why is procurement of rice, wheat subsidized. So these are all linked to water governance. It comes back in some ways. Of course, this 1 hour discussion hasn't done justice to the entire gamut of issues that one needs to look into. Or Ghazala's question on tradition and culture, I mean, we know if you superimpose a Corbusian vision on water governance, tradition is like to get lost. I mean, it is many examples in the book, I think, Seeing Like a State, it exemplifies that. We are aware of it. Now, the question is, what do you do about it? So, the only thing that comes to mind, although there may not be an immediate solution, I mean, we as citizens, Ghazala, if you are aware of it, you feel strongly about it, I think we should make sure that it comes into the domain of policy and gets lodged there for whatever it is worth, so that it doesn't get eroded. And just to say on that question of culture, I have seen in Bihar, there are 2 schemes. There is a Nal Jal mein, it does mention about restoration of traditional bodies. तो उसमें provision है, अब कितना हो रहा है नहीं हो रहा है, that depends on many other factors like how much aware are we as citizens and what are we going to do
Large
about
proportion
it.
of Jal Jeevan Mission design is actually decentralized. I mean, yes, there are multi-village schemes. So, see, this is almost always a mixed bag. Yeah, we're done. And thank you for being such a great audience. Thank you. Thank you for all your questions. And thank you to all the panelists. Thanks a lot.
So we're just felicitating all the guests on the stage. I invite Aditi onto the stage to felicitate the guests. KJ Joy.
No, that's it. You be there. Yeah, yeah. So sorry. No, that's fine. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Bishwajit Ghosh. Shraman Jha. Pratul Saxena. And lastly, our moderator, Anuj. Thank you everyone for joining us.